Okay, right, cool. Right, thank you everybody. I'm going to do a chat today about how Ansible over the last few years has evolved, particularly the use of includes in Ansible and the ability to then be able to refactor your code to make it a bit easier, clearer, and whatever as it's evolved. So a little bit about it. Of course, the company I work for. We do software for business management for agriculture and ground care dealers. We've got about 480 odd dealerships around the UK and Ireland. It's a console-based app that we sell generally. There's a Windows version as well, but the most used one is a console-based app, and it's written in a language called Dyble, which I'll pretty much guarantee anyone heard of it?
Yeah.
Oh wow! Well, one should do definitely. But oh, nice. Okay, that's good. And our application is actually 40 years old this year. So in keeping with an application that's that old, I thought I'd do a presentation in a terminal. So the other thing I'll say about this is some of the stuff I'm going to go over here. There probably are better ways of doing it. The way that I'm showing you here is basically how I kind of picked it up when I was kind of reading through the documentation, looking at the ubiquitous Stack Overflow, that sort of thing. Trying to work out the best way of doing it. Basically, at the time there weren't many people in the company that were interested in the CMDB, so there wasn't an awful lot of bouncing of ideas. So I'm sure there are better ways, and I'll be glad to hear those, particularly over a beer if anyone's going afterwards. So there's three types of include that has occurred in Ansible over the years. You've got the plain old include. You've got include role, which came in Ansible 2.0, and you've got include task, which came in Ansible 2.4. Just to sort of go over some of the basic concepts, because I don't know how many people here actually know or have used Ansible. The idea is it's supposed to be declarative, so trying to avoid imperative statements is sort of one thing, part of it. And it's agentless, which is one of the reasons I chose it, because I didn't want to have to wait for things to go and poll back to like the mothership, as it were, to try and work out where it's going. I can push the updates out rather than anything else. The building blocks of Ansible, you've basically got tasks, which are what you want to achieve. Notice that I say there achieve as opposed to do, because that's the whole declarative imperative thing, is where you want to end up, not necessarily specifying how you do it. So in this case, as an example, you'd see in there, it's all in YAML, by the way, the config of Ansible. So effectively there, what I'm doing is I'm calling the zipper module. I'm saying I want MariaDB and I want it to be present. You can use latest if you want to, or you can use absent if you want to remove it. Then you tie those together. Basically, you bunch a bunch of tasks together into what you call a role. So that might be, which you'll see in a minute, probably something like a Jenkins node or something like that. You can also group files and resources and various other things if you were trying to set your etc folder up or whatever else. And then what you get is a bunch of plays at the end of it, also known as playbooks. I think it comes from American football and that sort of thing. And what you do there is you're assigning a bunch of roles to effectively a bunch of hosts or groups or whatever in that. So you can see here what I'm saying is my Jenkins nodes, I'm expecting them to have the common role, Docker role, SSH keys role, and the Jenkins role itself. And then finally, kind of at the top level, if you like, you've got the inventory, which is where you define the different hosts, the ones what they belong to, the groups they belong to, and you can also set up some variables in there to populate various things as you're going along. So an example of effectively an inventory file you've got here. So you've got some variables at the top, they're defaults, and then as you can see, I'm overriding those defaults further down in some of the Linux nodes and Windows nodes groups. So just to go over the declarative stuff, as I mentioned earlier, you've got the sort of more imperative style, which is such and such, go and do this, as opposed to you are a Jenkins node and then you're expecting things to kind of happen to that. Prior to 2.0, as I mentioned, I called it the sort of plain old vanilla include earlier on. Most of the things that you could do with it were static, so it was fixed at compile time, so you couldn't really do so much actually at runtime. You couldn't branch so easily off runtime. there are various directives and stuff that you can't do. And most critically for what I'll be going over now, it was pretty much impossible to loop through a list. So you ended up you ended up with quite a lot of repeat code. Even if you're calling something, you're still repeating quite a lot of code. So what we had is, like a bit of a case study, although it was actually what I had to do at the time. I'm just trying to install a package on the system. So it should be simple. However, the company that I work for, I was kind of overjoyed to learn that when I started that basically we had a bunch of systems that hadn't been patched for about 10 years or so, so they were running SLES 10 and 11. What I've done about that and what I'm continuing to do about that is probably subject to a different talk. So, but effectively, one of the things that happened with that is that zipper module that I mentioned earlier on. It's got the method signatures on it changed, so you've different parameters and things like that from what Ansible was coded to be able to deal with. And not only that, even when you did actually put the right parameters in, sometimes things like dependency management didn't work correctly. It was a very early version of zipper. So I had to basically work around that in order to be able to then just install a package on some of the older systems that we've got in order to then update them. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, right, okay, I'm going to have a task that's going to check to see what version of zipper I've got. So I'm going to run zipper version. I'm going to scoop up effectively the standard out from that, and then I'm going to check that to find out whether it's zipper 1.0, which is the buggy version. There wasn't one before that. Not one that I encountered. And then, so if that's the case, then I'm going to say, right, in that case, I'm going to need to run with the workaround rather than the zipper module. If I was on SLES 11.3 and above, zipper works perfectly. So basically, in that case, I can then just say, right, okay, I'll install the package, make sure it's present, jobs are good. However, if it's not that kind of version, basically then I've got a whole bunch, all of this stuff to go through. So I've got to check whether the package is installed by doing an rpm-q, again, slurping the standard out. I default the variable, whether the package is installed or not, loop through. If I need to install it, I then download the package and then do an rpm-uvh to install it. So one thing that's missing from this is any kind of dependency management as well. So I had to basically work out what I would need to do, and for all of the, if I needed sort of 3 dependency management things, I would need to call this 3 times effectively. So yeah, pretty ugly, I think you'll agree. And the other thing is that if you look through this, all of these things, where it's checking to see whether it needs to do it or not, and all of these extra bits, you end up with a lot of skips. If the package was installed, it didn't need to do anything, you end up with an awful lot, as opposed to one skip that, hey, I didn't need to install the package, you end up with an awful lot of skips in here. Bearing in mind that I'm often not the one that's running this particular job, it'll be one of our engineers or one of our support guys that want to set up a system. So there was quite a lot of confusion that they were saying, oh, what are all these skips there and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, with the early days of Ansible, there was no way I could work to hide that sort of stuff. Also, every single one of those tasks has to be processed. Even if it's not going to do anything, it still has to process it. So that slows down the whole thing. Ansible's supposed to be fast, so I'm told, but certainly wasn't my case. So what I did is, to get around that and having all these excess skips, is I went back to using plain roles effectively. So I've got a role here, which is, if it's on SLES 110, then I'll install Jenkins packages using effectively the workaround. And if I'm on Leap or above, then I can just install packages using the way that Ansible was designed to install packages. So there you can see. The other thing that I mentioned about was the ability to be able to loop. So if you're on Leap 42, for example, here, I can provide a list of packages that I want to install and just let the thing do what it's supposed to do. However, if I've got to use the old RPM method, then effectively what I've got to do is set up a whole bunch of packages, where to get it, what packages I'm expecting, the name of the package, etc., so that I can check that in the RPM output. And then I'm going to call my include, having predefined those things. So they don't count as static include, or they are static includes rather, because they're defined at the time that the playbook is compiled rather than at the time when the playbook is run. I afterwards, doing this, I also discovered that you can include vars in the same thing. So rather than having to have 2 steps, I can do all in one step. But I'd actually moved to the next method that I'll show you in a sec before discovering that. I just thought I'd leave it in there for completeness. So the main issue I've got with that one is that if we upgrade one of those servers, so we upgrade from SLES 110 to Leap, for example, you would end up in there with, it will try to run the RPM install for an old package that shouldn't be installed on that system instead of running the correct one. So not great. You also need to maintain a list of package names and full URLs. And if you want to reuse that workaround, effectively, you can't tuck it away in a role. It's got to be one of the top level roles so that you can easily find it and easily use it. And it's just the playbooks are fairly unwieldy, and there's lots of duplication. So, however, help was at hand. Ansible 2.0, we've got the idea of include role. So it makes a huge difference to the ability to be able to, the main thing basically is loops at the end of the day. It makes it an awful lot easier, as I showed earlier in one of the earlier slides. So there now, you can see instead of having a whole bunch of other stuff going on, I've basically said my Jenkins servers have got common and Jenkins packages, and that's it. If I was being declarative, I should have called that Jenkins nodes, but there you go. So there you go, I'm defining the packages that I need, checking to see whether I need the workaround or not, and then all of that other stuff basically falls into, all of the conditional stuff falls into, if I can use Zipper, great, that's fine, I'll do that. If not, then I'm going to now include the role Zipper workaround with the same list of packages, and I can pass in, I can use a loop variable, and I can pass in the package into that other list of stuff to do the RPM install. And it worked sort of reasonably well. It kind of, that meant that I could be far more dynamic about what I was doing. But you still end up with a whole bunch of extra roles in there with the workarounds and that sort of thing. So the final iteration of this is when, with Ansible 2.4, you ended up with include tasks. That means that you can basically tuck away a lot of the stuff that was cluttering up the role folder. You can effectively tuck away in the role itself. So if it's to do with just that role and it's not shared across other things, then you can hide away a lot of that stuff, and you can keep all the stuff then in one place as opposed to having to root around your entire file system to try and or your Ansible file system to be able to dig out what you need. So as I mentioned, you can group the sub-roles and sub-roles as well. So now I've got a similar thing to the other one. I've taken out the common role because I didn't need that either. And ultimately, this is what we end up with. So because it's dynamic, I don't have to define this stuff up in advance. So what I'm doing here is the main call basically is just saying, right, all I'm going to do is call whatever the Ansible OS family is. So that would be SUSE, Windows, CentOS, whatever. So as you can see here then, assuming it's SUSE, it's going to call the SSH keys role that you saw earlier on, and it's also then going to call a sub-YAML effectively with the version. So that would be something like 11.0 or 12.1 or whatever it would be. And then if it's the Leap 42, for example, I'm also going to include Docker in there. So I'm going to call a role for that. And then I didn't cover this earlier on, but now we can also quite easily have Windows in there using the chocolatey module as opposed to the Zipper module, and I can call that with a list of things that I want to install, and I can configure my Windows nodes at the same time. But the main point of this is that with this final iteration, it's all included in one role. So all of those top level things all the extra roles that I was doing, all become encompassed in here, so it becomes a lot easier to navigate. I mentioned that earlier on. I think that's almost covered it. So yes, effectively, what I've ended up with is moving from a whole bunch of conditional code and that sort of thing into a far more declarative, obvious, easy to read format. Ultimately, I don't have to care what OS it is anymore because the role handles that underneath. I think that's about it. Thanks, folks. Any questions?
Have you done much with Vault?
No, not particularly. Yeah, I mean, I have sort of touched on it because I want to be able to store secrets and things like that. But yeah, I've not got sort of heavily involved in that currently. I tend to set up the SSH keys and then do it that way instead. Stunned everyone into silence.